Can I get you to take your seats, please? Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Davis, President of the Webster University Alumni Association and Chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Board. I am also a two-time alum from Webster. I've got my master's and my doctorate degree, both from Webster University. Today, I am here to introduce our next session, See Something, Say Something, Finding Your Voice in the Equity Conversation, presented by Desiree Coleman. Desiree is the first Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Wells Fargo. In her role, she leads diversity and inclusion strategy development for Wells Fargo advisors, leveraging internal and external relationships to drive team member outcomes, marketplace outcomes, and diversity and inclusion advocacy. Desiree, thank you so much for being here, and everyone, please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. How are you all? Okay, you're gonna have to indulge me because I need energy, so can you just kind of stand up, stretch, move around, okay? All right? Talking about some important stuff. All right. Thank you for indulging me. So again, my name is Desiree Coleman, and I want to share a little bit about myself. So I'm a mom. I'm a corporate executive, and I'm also a St. Louis native. And so being from St. Louis presents its own interesting set of challenges, right? Because I know the good of St. Louis, and I know the worst of St. Louis. So I remember when the Cards won their division in 1987, all right? I remember, all right, Cards fans in the house? Is Ann still here? I remember when the Pope visited, right? Anybody remember that? All right. I remember when the kids in my kindergarten class, I remember wondering why none of the white kids wanted to play with me. And I will never, ever, ever forget August 9th, 2019. So journey with me as we talk about equity and your role in finding your place and space in the equity conversation. If you're on social media, follow me and tag me as you're posting today at Desiree S. Coleman. So let's get started. All right. So in our time today, I'm going to tell you a little bit. Let me move this down. It's magical. I'm actually mic'd. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Then we'll talk about some shared language and definitions. We'll talk about your role, and then we'll talk about where we go from here. And you will walk out of here with a clear vision of what you're going to do. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Got it. All right. So in order to do that, I need you to commit to some things, right? So I need you to lean in, suspend whatever preconceived notions you may have. If you are new to the equity conversation, welcome. If you are advancing the equity conversation, welcome. Just come at this from a place of curiosity and learning, and then be present. So we're going to talk. I want this to be interactive, and we're going to have some fun. Is that all right? All right. So since we're going to be talking, I need you to introduce yourselves to your neighbors. So turn to your neighbor, tell them your name, ask them how they're doing, ask them what they have for breakfast. All right, talk to your neighbor. All right. Bring it back in. Okay. I'm going to do my teacher. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. I had to go to 3rd grade for y'all. Okay, great. So let's get started. Where'd it all begin? All right, I love this picture, okay? And it's not because my outfit was amazing, all right? I love this picture because it reminds me of a very significant day. That was the day that Adam B. called me a nigger. Okay. 3rd grade, gym class, right? And I still remember the sting of his words. He yelled, "That's why God left you in the oven for too long. You're like burnt toast, nigger." Right? It's pretty ugly. Because those words literally seared my soul. But before he could finish the last syllable, I was connecting a right hook because it's not okay. And I couldn't believe I was fighting a boy, and I don't even know if I won or lost. I just remember I wasn't having it, all right? So that, my friends, was my entrance into the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. At your table, you have some papers. So everybody grab a sheet of paper. If you are following online, just grab a sheet of paper. It's two-sided. So you're gonna flip, and the first question is, what was your entrance into the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation? So I want you to just take a moment and think about your very first encounter with anything related to inclusion or diversity or equity. I'm gonna give you 90 seconds. And if you're done, turn to your neighbor and share. Find a partner. I see you people in the back, you too. Find a partner and share. I was told that you were going to capture amazing photographs.
Somebody told you a lie. No, okay. So they'll probably, Vince will probably send you a link to where you can download all this stuff. So,
Really?
Okay. Cool.
You gonna take a picture of me?
What's that?
You gonna take a picture of me?
One more time. My hearing is.
No. I said you're gonna take a picture of me,
Oh, I have been.
and I'm gonna
But
do
you're
it.
talking all this. So make sure you're smiling all the time.
I can't. All right, take 20 more seconds. All right, guys, let's come back together. And come back together. And one more time, come back together. All righty, does anybody want to share? Anybody want to share? Is there a mic? Do we have mics? I want to be sensitive to people who may be hard of hearing, so this gentleman right here. You guys know I can tap dance, so I might try. Over here.
My entrance into the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, lifelong resident of St. Louis, and in 1999, I came out to my friends and family, having been a student at an all-male high school. It was challenging, but that would be kind of my first experience with diversity and inclusion, and kind of my entrance into the world.
How were you treated when you came out?
Surprisingly well.
Okay.
Again, my fears at the time when I came out were pretty intense because obviously being, in the late 90s,
Yeah.
it's a completely different world than today. So, but my students at the high school, my friends, were very supportive, very caring, and fortunately, I had the support of my family as well. So it was a pretty good experience overall, but nonetheless, it was very daunting and,
Yeah.
nerve-wracking, to say the least.
Thank you for sharing. Can we give him a round of applause? It takes courage to share and be vulnerable. Would you like to share? Right behind you.
When you showed your picture from 3rd grade, it sparked a memory for me. In 5th grade, I went on a field trip to the symphony, and we had lunch at Wendy's. I mean, it's so etched in my brain. I remember all the details. And I lived in St. Louis in an all-black community and went to an all-black school. There was a white boy in Wendy's across the restaurant who waved at me. And I turned around, I was like, me? And he said, yeah. And he walked over and said, I like you. And I said, you can't like me because I'm black and you're white. And he said, what difference does that make? And that literally blew my mind and started me on the path to being a diversity and inclusion advocate from 5th grade up to now.
Awesome. That's amazing. Let's clap it up. One more. Y'all, this is Miss Keisha Speaks. Yes, okay, so she's a speaker. Beautiful. It's
Mrs.
Excuse me.
Thank you. My first entrance, I would say, into diversity came in 7th grade when we relocated to Streamwood, Illinois from St. Louis. So my community I grew up in is everybody from this corner to that corner to those blocks, we all looked alike. My school looked alike. And I can remember this specifically. My mom, my stepdad, and myself, we got to the school I was going to register and go to school. There was a break, so you can see that the students were walking down the hall. I can remember sitting in the chair, and there was a window, and I saw students walking, and I kept saying, 1, 2. I was counting the number of white students that I saw, and I had not seen another student that looked like me. And from that moment on, I realized that I'm in a place now where I needed to start finding my voice. It was the best experience. It's changed my life. From then on, I've always wanted to teach people how to communicate with people that don't look like them. Awesome. I'm in diversity and inclusion today, but I know it started way back then when I had the courage to say, it's all good, hey.
Awesome. Let's clap it up for her. Thank you. You know what, I just jumped right into my presentation, but I see so many friends and family who are here to support me. I see Miss Roz in the back. My mom is here, y'all. My mom's in the head. Wave, Mom. And this is my precious niece, McKenna. So the thing that I think is so interesting about like the stories that I heard, like y'all remember it in vivid detail. It was a Wednesday. It was cold outside. I mean, like you remember it. Because these experiences are so profound for us. So I want to ground us in some language. And so we're going to talk about equity. And so a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals will say diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. But I really want to move us past that into equity. So in this scenario, equity would mean you were invited to the planning committee, okay? You were invited to the decision-making table to ensure that the party worked for everyone from the time to the date to the location. And I think it's really important because when you have a diverse set of stakeholders who are a part of decision-making, you get better results, and it works for everyone. So if you were on the planning committee, you would ensure that there were ADA accommodations so that Susie could come, right? You would ensure that there was a gluten-free option for Dante. You would ensure that in addition to sending out the email invitation, you would also print it in Braille so that Bobby wouldn't accidentally show up with a Star Wars costume because he thought it was a costume party, right? You would take the steps to think about what everyone needs to really make it successful and valuable for all people. And so I love this. It's by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it really just kind of characterizes and shows the difference between equity and equality. You'll hear people say, like, I'm fighting for equality. I don't want you to fight for equality. I want you to fight for equity, because equity means you are giving people what they need. So if you take a look at the visual, so the first woman is in a wheelchair, and if you give everybody the same bicycle, she can't do anything with that. That does not meet her needs. If you look at, look how hunched over he is, right? If you look at the next woman, the bike fits her, and for my little guy in the end, the bike is too small. If you can give everyone what they need, then everyone can participate. Everyone gets what they need. And so that's really the essence of equity. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, awesome. Now, do I have any Starbucks fans in the house? All right, give me somebody. What's your drink of choice? What do you love? She has it here, and that was not planned. All righty. So I was recently in Chicago, and I had a chance to go to the Starbucks Reserve Roastery. Anybody been there? It's pretty amazing. It is 4 levels. It has a full bar. They have live music, and they actually roast the coffee beans there, and then they like shoot it up over this thing, and they put it in the container, and then they make it, and it's a whole experience. And so I was there, and I wanted to know about their diversity training. So I went up to one of the managers, and I was like, I know you shut down all of your corporate U.S. stores following all of the stuff that you were in the news about. How was that? And he was like, it was a really good start, and we have some other things planned, and I think we can continue to evolve. But then he went on to talk about, like, he did this commercial for Starbucks, and he went on to talk about like all of the ways that their company is really trying to be people-centric. And so he mentioned that they call their baristas partners, because every single Starbucks employee gets stock options, and they give 100% tuition, and you can borrow up to a certain amount, and just all of these different things. And so I was like asking, I was like, how is that possible? Like, you are a corporation. How is this successful corporation doing that? And he was like, it's simple, because our motto internally is never put profit before people. And that really spoke to me, because they changed the game. Like, there is a way that business is done, and then they shifted that, and they were like, you know what, that doesn't work for us, so we're going to do something different. And I think that's what we really need to be talking about, is systems level change. So there is a book that I love. It's by Michelle Alexander. It's called The New Jim Crow. Anyone read it? Y'all add this to your reading list. Michelle Alexander. It's called The New Jim Crow. And it's about mass incarceration, and it talks about how the prison system and the educational system and the social service systems are all challenged, and they all have some major issues. But in her book, she argues that those systems are functioning exactly as they were intended to. And so she gives this quote, and she said, "We could choose to be a nation that extends care, compassion, and concern to those who are locked up and locked out, and to support them before they headed to prison before they're old enough to vote. We could seek for them the same opportunities we seek for our own children. We could treat them like one of us. We could do that. Or we could choose to be a nation that shames and blames its most vulnerable, affixes badges of dishonor upon them at young ages, and then relegates them to a permanent second-class status for life. This is the path we have chosen, and it leads to a familiar place." So I want you to let that sink in. Think about it. What does that mean? And when you're ready, turn to a different neighbor and share. All right. It's good. Yes. Talk about her quote, that systems are performing exactly the way that they are intended to be. I'm calling y'all out because I don't see y'all talking. I want to see some talking. I see y'all. I see you. Oh, just in short, it's about how systems perform, and that the criminal justice system, the education system, we talk about it having problems, but it's actually performing the way that it's intended to perform. So what do you think about her saying that? Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, take about 20 more seconds. All right, let's bring it back. All righty. Thank you. Can I have two people just share what you discussed? And a couple people wanted some clarification. So, you know, Michelle Alexander's point is that we look at all these challenges in society and we say like, oh my goodness, this is a travesty of justice. Her point is that the systems are performing exactly the way that they were designed to perform. So, some thoughts. Two people looking for somebody to share. Yes. Mike Runner, help me out here. All righty.
Hi, my name is Kristen. I actually work for Webster University on Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland,
Nice.
so I'm here for this event. But I wanted to share with everybody, you brought something up that was very, very relevant. Last week, so my daughter is in elementary school on a military base. There was a threat of mass violence at her school last week. So I'm there on base. Department of Homeland Security comes in, OSI comes in. This is a presidential base. This is a school on base. So there's this huge reaction, and we go to this parent meeting, and every single person in that meeting wanted to know, how is this child being punished? Who is this child? Why is this child being allowed back? And I'm sitting there going, I can't be the only person wondering what we're doing to help this child.
Yeah.
This is a sign that something's wrong with this child. This is a service member's child.
Yeah.
He's coming back in 10 days, but what are we doing to help him?
Yeah.
We now have military police in full uniform walking down the halls of my child's school. What are we doing to help the children that are there?
Yeah.
I don't care how severely this child's being punished, and I don't want to know about that. I want to know how we can help this child.
Yeah.
How can we help our children that are there? And I actually ended up taking my child out of school that day. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take her home because this isn't a good learning environment. I don't want her to hear all about how we're punishing this child.
Yeah.
So you really hit home with that.
Thank
we
you.
should be focusing on how are we going to help this child? How are we going to help our children that are in that school learn?
Yep.
But instead it was all focused on why is he only getting 10 days out of school?
It reminds me of like trauma-informed care. And so stepping back to say like, what's going on? Like what would cause a child to make a bomb threat? And like what's going on internally? What's going on in the home? What do we need to ask more questions? Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's somebody right here. Hi, Coach Dana.
Good morning. My name is Dana Isom. It made me think of what you first said when you first opened up about being invited to the decision-making process. The decisions were made with a few people who were in charge, so the decisions were made to benefit them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's continuing to benefit them,
Mm-hmm.
and it will continue to benefit them until we change the process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can we clap it up for both of them? So, in speaking about Michelle Alexander, I just wanted to kind of put a point on that. The systems perform the way that they do because we allow them to perform that way. Like, we always have the option to change the system, but we have to have the will to do so. We have to have people in positions of power who are willing to dismantle systems that don't work for everyone and then come up with solutions that do. So putting that back into context for St. Louis, think about the challenges that we face as a region, and just get 3 of them in your mind. And I'm going to venture to guess it's our issue with race. It might be education. It might be how. It might be any number of things. But to ground us, you may feel like it's a dumpster fire. You may feel like there are challenging things going on. And that it's a really daunting task, but I wanted to think about data. I missed the slide. Thank you. I wanted to think about data because the Ferguson Commission report really helps us to think about St. Louis in the context of all the issues that they see. And the cornerstone of the report is that these are not isolated incidents that happen. These are systems level issues. This is about how systems interact, about how communities are supported, about how schools are resourced, around how services are divvied out, and all of that affects how people experience it. And they have a quote that really says, "We have not moved beyond race." This is coming from the Ferguson Commission report. It says, "St. Louis does not have a proud history on this topic, and we are still suffering the consequences of decisions made by our predecessors," which I think is the point you were making. However, it's important to understand that racial inequity in our region is not the same as individual racism. We are not pointing the fingers or calling individual people racist. We are not even suggesting that institutions or existing systems intend to be racist. What we are pointing out is that data suggests time and time again that our institutions and existing systems are not equal, and that has racial repercussions. Black people in the region feel those repercussions when it comes to law enforcement, the justice system, housing, health, education, and income. So when you looked at the indicators, and if you haven't read the report, they even have an executive summary that is short and sweet that will get you grounded in data. But if you look at health, education, lifespan, income, there are all disparities by race, which means that you can predict an individual's outcome in life based on their race. And that is the exact opposite of equity. And so back to the dumpster fire, you may feel like, how do we even address this? Like, what does that look like? It may feel weighty, but we all have to prioritize what does it look like to have a new and evolved system. And so my question is, what does that mean for you, right? So we all have a role in advancing equity. I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, "That means you." Turn to the other one and say, "That means you too." So we all have a role to play in actualizing equity. We might not have built the system, but we are feeling the repercussions of the system. And so, I think there are kind of 4 considerations that come into play in deciding how you show up in the equity conversation. And really, as I was just sort of thinking about my own life's experience, how I have come into this conversation, I think these 4 things really encapsulate the considerations you'll make internally as you show up. So you'll think about connections to community. What groups are you a part of? Are there any like-minded folks, or are you out there championing this all on your own? Your perceived proximity to power will impact your willingness and readiness to stand up and have tough conversations. Also, your willingness to challenge the status quo. There are some people who are like, fight the power, like, let's do this. There are some people who are like, not my thing. So depending on who you are and what, your makeup and your build and your ethos is going to impact how you show up. And then 4th is your ability to be uncomfortable. And I'll give you an example from my own life. So I was a graduate student at Syracuse University, and I went there to study public administration. I was so excited. And I had a very challenging professor? Has anybody ever had a challenging professor? Has anybody ever been that challenging professor? So, this professor had some issues, quite honestly, and it really can be summed up in one word, and that he was biased, right? So he felt that the PhD students were superior to the master's degree students. He felt that the men in the class were superior to the women, and he felt that the non-diverse students were superior to the diverse students. And so I felt the brunt of all of the things that he was dealing with. So we got this assignment. We had to write a 30-page thesis. And y'all, I'm a good student. And so when I got the assignment, I was like, yes. I did my little outline. I would go to class. I would ask questions. He'd ask a question. I'd be like, me. And then he would say, okay, well, give me the answer. And I'd say something. And he'd be like, not quite what I'm looking for. And somebody would literally restate what I just said. And he'd be like, oh, my gosh, that's it right there. So there were always these sort of things. So I knew what I was dealing with. So I went to his office hours, and I was like, here's my outline. Give me some feedback. He was like, you're on the right track, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's going to be great. So I wrote the paper, and I got a C. And for context, a C in graduate school is like a D or a F, right? And so I went back to him, and I kindly reminded him that, like, we had gone over this together, and he could not give me an explanation why I got that grade. He simply said, I'll give you the opportunity to rewrite it. So I rewrote the whole paper and went through this exercise again, and he gave me a B minus. And I was just like, whatever. But I am super clear that that grade was less about the concepts that he and I had directly discussed together and more about him and his perception of me. And that just isn't right. And I was upset, angry, and I was like, I need to go talk to somebody. I need to do something. So pop quiz. If you were me, what would you have done? By show of hands, right? Would you have, A, flipped over a desk? No? No? Okay. Okay. Not your thing. Got it. How many people would have spoken to the dean? Or the chair? Chair, okay. How many people would have written a letter? You're a letter writer? Okay. Letter writer, okay. And then how many people would have done nothing? There are some. Okay, y'all gonna have to see me afterwards and let me in on this joke, because there's something happening here. There's something happening here, right? So I'm sad to say, y'all, I took option D, and I did nothing. I know, right? And why? Because I was afraid. I had a graduate fellowship there that paid for my entire graduate school education. So I was like, I can't really say anything. I was afraid because he was a tenured professor. I was afraid that if I said something and raised a ruckus with like the university, I might get labeled like a troublemaker. And so I said nothing. And that has haunted me to this day. And when I think about the 4 things I mentioned, it was me alone, not connected to a coalition. My proximity to power, I felt like the individual and the institutions had more power than me. I was uncomfortable with challenging that power. And so I let the status quo continue. And I had to ask myself, like, where was my 3rd grade me who was ready? But that brings me to my first point, which is you have to find your lane. So when I say August 9th, what comes to mind? Mike Brown, all right? That is a day that is forever seared into my mind. I remember exactly where I was. We were at a family barbecue. We were like laughing, and then somebody was like, somebody got shot, and we're still there, and then somebody's like, his hands are up. And I remember that day, and it wasn't until like 2 days later when I'm literally watching the national news, and I'm like, this is my city. Like, this is my hometown. Like, how, like, what, how, right? And I was thinking about the people who were fearless and courageous and put it on the line, and who were like, yeah, enough's enough. We want some systems change. And those are the protesters who went out. And so, I kept thinking, I got to get out there, And so finally, about like 10 days into the protest, I went out there. I had on sunglasses. I had on a ball cap. I might as well have had on a fake mustache because, I didn't want to be seen, or to say it differently, I could not afford to be seen based on where I was. And because I was now on the front line protesting, at least one person sort of questioned my commitment to advancing equity. And that just, it really, it didn't sit right with me. And it took me a long time to realize that some of the people, not all, some of the people who were there had the privilege based on their place of employment. So whether that was a liberal nonprofit or a foundation or a small startup, their company esteemed their leadership in that way. And so I started to kind of think about how I can do my own work and, again, find my lane. So there's a book I read by a gentleman by the name of Cy Khan. It's called Creative Community Organizing, and he talks about how movements are born. And he talks about every single step that ladders up to big and monumental change. And he talks about one-on-ones, which are private meetings with key influencers, key decision makers, where you understand their trigger points, understand what they will and won't do, what they'll commit to. And you need people leading those conversations. And then I have a colleague, Jessica Wernley, who talks about power mapping in the context of community organizing. And in the book, they talk about strategy sessions and accountability sessions, where you try to get people to commit to them. And it brought me to this understanding that I have a place. I have a place in the equity conversation. It may not look like someone else's place, but I have a place. And that brings me to my point, my next point. What is going on? My next point is not here, but my next point is use what you have. And so, how many people are on Twitter? Okay. So I think there is, when you're on Twitter, there's this thing where you feel like you have to sound really intellectual and really deep, and you have to say something that's super profound. And so I would find myself ooh, what's a clever hashtag? And that just wasn't me, and it wasn't authentic to me. And so, I finally came to the realization, I have 2 small children, shout out to my baby girls. And so being out protesting, that just wasn't for me. And so I think that there's a space where you can use what you have. So if you are a student, you can talk to other students, right? You can find those who share the same beliefs as you do. Find the people who are just as incensed about human trafficking, or the people who share your commitment to food insecurity, and link up with those people. If you are a professor, think about your colleagues within your department and across departments. So if you're thinking about environmental justice, come up with an interdisciplinary strategy where y'all can tackle things on a larger level. If you work in corporate America, consider your employee resource groups and use that for skills-based volunteerism to tackle a problem that you're passionate about. And if you're retired, use your extra time to contribute to a cause that is meaningful and that matters to you. And I love this quote. During the death of Nipsey Hussle, Lauren London said this, and it was so profound for me. So after the protests are over, the marathon continues. And what does that mean? So I had to consider, what do I have? Using what I have. I spent 5 years working in corporate philanthropy as a grant maker. And during that time, I saw who got funded, how those funding decisions were happening. And one thing I noticed was that in some cases, people of table were not the ones who were the recipient of those grants. And so I considered what I could do using the skills that I have to advance more equitable solutions. So I founded a fellowship for diverse nonprofit leaders and women, and created a 10-month fellowship giving them marketing, coaching, training to help them be even more competitive, to try to break down some silos. Among my funder friends, I had conversations and really just changed the paradigm for how we talked about what successful nonprofits look like. That was my lane, and it was specific to me. And what I'm saying to you is, you have something that you can contribute to. And then as we think about, my third point, it's really run your race. So I mentioned I have 2 girls. I love them. Did I tell y'all I love them? I love them. And so one is 10, one is 7, and my 10-year-old sometimes gets a little jealous of my 7-year-old. And she'll be like, but she got a bigger piece of cake. And I'll just say, don't worry about what she's doing. Run your race. Like, focus on what you have to do. Don't worry about anybody else. And I'm going to say the same thing to you. So you don't necessarily have to emulate anyone else, because there's no right way to use your voice. We need people on the streets, and we need people in positions of power who know how to influence change and who understand the key messages and can communicate that in a way that can move entire institutions. We need people to work within the system, and we need people to work outside of the system. And so we talk about protesting and activists, and a question for you all is it possible to have that same mindset on the inside of an institution? Could you be actively working to find people who are like-minded and to advance causes that make things better for everyone, right? Really, I'm just trying to help you to understand that we all have a responsibility, and we all have a responsibility to continue to learn. We may not have the answers today, but we have to lean in and be willing to have those conversations. So one of the things I like to do, excuse me, is at the beginning of the year, take some time to do some goal setting. And I'll do a vision board. I'll invite folks to my home to do a vision board. And this year I wrote, do more public speaking. Power of intentionality. I also, about 4 years ago, wrote my own personal mission statement. And this was to give me clarity so that I could kind of check myself every day, like, am I doing the things that matter most to me? My personal mission statement is super simple. It's 1 sentence. And I want to inspire others and build communities. If I'm doing those 2 things each and every day, then I'm true to my values. And so I want you to take your paper. You might have to flip over. And the first question on there is kind of like, what breaks your heart? So my desire to inspire others is born out of my commitment to underrepresented communities, my commitment to supporting people who are vulnerable, because those are the things that really touch my heart. So I'm asking you, what breaks your heart? So take a minute and just sort of write down 1 or 2 things. And these will be causes or issues that really resonate with you. And you're not going to share these, so you can feel free to be honest. And if you're online, feel free, grab a sheet of paper and do the same thing. Think about the issues that are most compelling for you. And then as you come up with that, I want you to continue to write, but then come up with your own personal mission statement. 1 sentence. This is not a thesis, 1 sentence. Every day, what do you want to wake up and be focused on? want you to stay in that stream of writing. And then as you think about some of what I mentioned earlier, your level of comfort, your proximity to power, think about the issue that you wrote down for yourself. Think about what you define as your own personal mission. And then what's one or two things that you could commit to personally doing? Again, this is not for anybody else, this is for you. What's something that you could do? And that might mean having a difficult conversation. That might mean writing a letter. It could be something big. It could be something small. The point here is intentionality, and this is how you start to find your lane in the equity conversation. So take a few more seconds and write. I want you to bring your thoughts to a close. I won't ask anybody to share, but if you've had an epiphany or an eager, raise your hand. You can share. But really, again, this is for you. And the reason I took us through this exercise is because as you get clear on your values, you can understand how you want to show up in this world. And as you get clear on what matters to you, you can understand what lane you want to drive. I want to leave you with a quote that I love by Martin Luther King Jr. And it says, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you have to do to keep moving forward. So my charge to each of you, do one thing and continue to move forward. Thank you so much. They say we have a few minutes for questions. Do we have any questions, comments, reflections, aha moments? You guys seem this is very sobering. Yes.
And it's not really a question, but an observation. It kind of goes back to what you were talking about with the new Jim Crow. And you were talking about the fact that people don't see the system. And so, since this is an institution of education, I would challenge people to really consider how we are educating the children. Because we are not teaching children to systems think, and we are not teaching children to critically think, and we're not teaching children to stand up and to challenge. That's something that they've taken out of schools, as well as teaching children about their civic responsibility. So when you take all of those things out of the school, and their parents haven't had it either because it's been taken out for a while, it's kind of a ludicrous thought to think that when they get to be 20 years old or 25 years old, that they're going to be able to be allies and advocates and activists, and that they're going to be able to change the system. Because first and foremost, they can't even see the system, because that's just the way that it is. So, you know, when you're choosing schools for your kids, if you don't ask the question, how are you teaching kids to critically think? Then you're doing your kids a disservice, because they're not being taught to think. They can't deduce their way out of a paper bag oftentimes, which is why they end up in the system.
Thank you. Can we give her a round of applause? Any other thoughts, comments, reflections? Yes, sir. Can somebody get him a mic? I just want to be sure if there's anybody hard of hearing.
Oh. I thought she was first. Oh, I see. Yeah, I think.
I'm sorry, I'm messing up the mic situation.
No,
My
no,
bad.
no. Yeah, hold on. She's not looking too.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Fridas, and thank you for having us here this morning. My question to you is that we've talked a lot about systems, we've talked about having, being vessels of change within our own organizations and our communities, and I think you are someone who is prolific and I think you're at a point, in my viewpoint, where you start to change systems and where you have a little bit more of that power than I think a lot of us in this room do. So how do you leverage that in your day-to-day?
Me or you?
You, personally.
Okay. And I'm going to throw it back and challenge you to think about it, too. So I think you bring up a very good point, because I think it's kind of like the Matrix. You can't unsee something. So as I read and I learn, like, I am driven to want to do more. Context matters, right? So within my organization, I have to think very strategically about what's going to fly, what's not going to fly. I also have to think strategically about, sometimes I don't have to be the messenger, but if I can identify somebody who maybe has closer proximity to the key decision maker, how do I leverage my influence? I think a lot about influence. So people, will say, like, I'm not in a leadership role, where you can be a leader and still not exhibit leadership, because really leadership is around, like, how do you move things forward? So that's in the conversations that you have, that's in being able to set a vision and articulate it and get people to come behind you and follow it. That's being able to identify the resources, to build collaborations when you don't have those resources, to be able to communicate it. It's all of those things wrapped into it. And so I think my leadership has enabled me to push my organization, and I have to be cognizant, because of course I want to push more and faster, but I have to be cognizant of where everyone is in doing that. Does that help? Does that answer your question? All right, so you have to see me afterwards and tell me how you're going to push too. Okay. Sir, you had a question? Comment?
It's more of an observation, but the organization that I work with helped really support the Raise the Age, and kind of like goes with your theme of it's still going on, and it's done legally, it's done through the law, and it passed, and the guy who sponsored it was kind of a conservative Republican, so we're like, well, a little odd, but we'll take it. Well, it turns out what he's done is there were like 6 reasons you could be certified as an adult when you were 17.
Okay.
He added.
You're talking about in criminal justice?
Pardon me?
Are you talking about in criminal justice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in criminal justice. So the guy who sponsored the bill then took the 6 things, which were like rape and murder and things, and say, well, you can be, treated as an adult if it's these major crimes.
Yeah.
Then the same guy added 2 more pieces to that. One of them being possession of a gun, which is like 80% of why people are arrested. So the same guy who sponsored it now has made it almost impossible to vote for it, even with the concept. On top of that, it wasn't funded in any way. And you'd think, well, there's some money there, right? Because all these people who were, these 17-year-olds who were in the adult system now come down. So isn't the Department of Corrections have money that they can give to the juvenile system?
Yeah.
And we talked to people about that. No, there's no money in the Department of Corrections. It's already gone. And they had to go ask for more money from the governor to keep the Department of Corrections going. So it looks like you're making progress, but underneath, I don't know if this guy had an ulterior motive. He knew it would never go anywhere, probably. So he played both sides of the fence,
Yeah.
I think. Anyway, it's happening every day.
Well, I think what you bring up is the point that there will be setbacks, right? So we want to have this kumbaya, like, I am committed to justice, and like it happens, and like sometimes it doesn't happen. So I think about, I just watched Harriet. Has anybody seen Harriet? And oh my gosh, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It was so good. But I think about folks who were in slavery and who were like, this doesn't work for me. And like, although the present conditions were such that that was how the system was built, they had a vision of, seeing something different. And so they actively worked towards that, right? It didn't happen overnight though. Chattel slavery was in existence for hundreds of years. And so this idea that there will be bumps and bruises, I think expect them, and then come up with plan B. And like, how do you then, build new coalition, build new alliances, and continue to make movement? So thank you for that. I'm looking at my timekeeper. How much time we got? I'm getting the wrap it up sign. Do we have one more question? Any takers?
Hello, my name's Kayla.
Hi.
When you're talking about, especially with like grassroots organizations or smaller organizations, and trying to build more community and reach out for a more to have and create a diverse, inclusive environment, and trying to bring more equity, but when your diversity and inclusion committee is very white, how do we kind of go and reach out to the community and without trying to seem like like ulterior motives or the white savior,
Yeah.
but also wanting to really bring in together a community? Like, what's the best steps to creating and like reaching out to build that?
Is there an option to add more diversity to your council?
That, yeah, there's absolutely opportunity, but as it's a sport, and so trying to make sure that our sport looks accessible. As of right now, there is a very little to no representation, especially in our community that is so culturally diverse and not doing that. So making sure that our community can seem that, but it starts with the few trying to build the community, so when we bring those people in, that they feel and they want to stay, they feel
Right.
accepted and want to stay.
I mean, I think the inclination to have partnerships is a great place to start. I would say, like, there is a saying from the disability rights movement, which is nothing about us without us. And so this idea that people who will be directly impacted by choices like are at the decision-making table. So that's why I asked, like, is there an opportunity to make that more diverse? If there's not, then you might consider, like, what are your opportunities to partner with other organizations? Are there alliances? And so we do this thing at work called Strength Finders. My top 5 is strategy, so I'm always thinking like strategy. So if you are thinking like your end result, you want that to be more diverse players, you have to think about all the points along the way. So what are the inputs? Like, is price a barrier, and the equipment that you need a barrier? Is it, proximity to whatever type of fields or practice opportunities that you need? Is it awareness? Do people even like it? And so you have to think about, like, back it up and think about all the steps along the way that are going to help you get to your ultimate outcome. Wrap it up. Okay, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So we are going to continue to move right along. Hello, my name is Alexandria McEwen. I am the Vice President of the Webster University Alumni Association, and I am also a Senior Specialist Applications Developer at AT&T. I received my BS, my MBA, and my MS degrees all from